Hello, this is Brian, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the August 11th issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Russian attacks kill 10 in Ukraine as Zelensky says Moscow is getting more North Korean missiles. Russia attacked Ukrainian cities with missiles, drones, and glide bombs Tuesday, killing at least 10 civilians, officials said, as President Volodymyr Zelensky said Moscow is getting new military help from North Korea for its more than 4-year-old invasion. Zelensky said Russian forces used ballistic missiles supplied by North Korea in an overnight attack on the southeastern city of Zaporizhzhia, where officials said 7 people were killed and 24 wounded. 3 more people, including a 15-year-old boy, were killed by Russian drones and artillery in the central Dnipropetrovsk region, authorities said. In addition to the ballistic missiles, North Korea is preparing to deploy more of its troops to Russia, Zelensky said late Monday. Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un signed a strategic partnership agreement in 2024, pledging mutual aid if either country faces aggression. Kim has sent thousands of troops and huge supplies of weapons to support Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Some experts say the engagement with Moscow is helping improve North Korea's military capabilities, and Zelensky said the battlefield experience would help Pyongyang menace other countries in its region. Ukraine says Russia is poised to escalate the war. Ukraine says Russia is scaling up its production of ballistic missiles, aiming to exploit Kiev's critical shortage of Patriot air defense interceptors that can stop them, and claims Moscow is preparing to recruit more troops for a new push on the front line that stretches 775 miles along eastern and southern Ukraine. Every step Russia takes, increasing ballistic missile production, bringing in North Korean equipment, preparing for mobilization, all of this shows that Moscow is preparing not for peace, but for escalation, Zelensky said on social media. In an unusual step, Ukraine's Air Force didn't say in its daily report how many missiles Russia launched overnight. It was not clear whether the omission was deliberate, and Kiev officials made no immediate comment. U.S.-led diplomatic efforts to stop the war have fizzled as Washington grew frustrated with the lack of progress, and its attention turned to the Iran war. The Kremlin will not enter serious negotiations or make meaningful compromises on its demands as long as Putin believes that he has a viable military path to achieving his full objectives, the Institute for the Study of War, a Washington-based think tank, said in an analysis Monday. Ukraine's Patriot shortages offer Russia an opportunity to cause various serious damage to Ukraine over the coming winter and will therefore contribute to delaying meaningful negotiations and protracting the war, it said. Russia hits the grounds of Kiev Children's Hospital. Russian forces also struck parts of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, overnight, according to officials. One strike hit the grounds of a children's hospital, leaving 2 craters and shattering windows, the state emergency service said. Children and medical workers were in bomb shelters and nobody was hurt, it added. At another location in Kiev, a Russian strike started a fire in a warehouse that spread across about nearly 13,000 square feet, according to emergency officials. The Russian Defense Ministry said its forces overnight struck military industrial facilities and transport and logistics centers in Kiev and Zaporizhzhia with ground-based precision weapons. It said in a statement that it hit civilian storage facilities housing drones in Kiev and a metallurgical plant in Zaporizhzhia. Russia targeted both cities with Zircon anti-ship missiles and Iskander ballistic missiles while launching 120 long-range strike drones across the country, Ukraine's Air Force said. Russia's biggest e-commerce company hit again. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry said its air defenses overnight intercepted nearly 400 Ukrainian drones over 14 regions and Crimea, the peninsula that Moscow illegally annexed from Kiev in 2014. Russia's biggest online retailer, Wildberries, said in a statement its logistical facilities in the Voronezh region on the border with Ukraine came under attack and caught fire. It added that the fire was extinguished and goods stored there were largely undamaged. Ukraine has repeatedly struck Wildberries warehouses and has also bombarded Russian oil facilities in what it says is a strategy to compel Putin to negotiate an end to the invasion. Ukraine's general staff said its forces struck an oil refinery in the city of Orsk in Russia's Orenburg region near the border with Kazakhstan, about 930 miles from Ukraine, causing a fire. The refinery, with an annual processing capacity of about 44 million barrels of crude oil, produces gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel, among other products. The extent of the damage was being assessed, the military said. Wall Street drifts near its all-time high as oil prices keep swinging. U.S. stocks are hanging around their records on Tuesday, while oil prices keep swinging on uncertainty about when the war with Iran will allow crude to flow freely again. The S&P 500 added 0.1% and remained near its all-time high set on Friday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 7 points, or less than 0.1% as of 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and the Nasdaq Composite was nearly unchanged. The action was more unsettled in the oil market, where the price for a barrel of Brent crude briefly jumped above $90 in the morning before falling back below $87. It was most recently at $87.99, up 0.3% from Monday's settlement price. Such swings have become typical since the United States and Israel attacked Iran in late February, which led to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and kept much of the world's oil pent up in the Middle East. Last month alone, Brent's price veered between $72 and $102 per barrel. Higher oil prices make inflation worse, and they've sent the average cost for a gallon of regular gasoline to $4.01, according to AAA. That's up from less than $3.14 a year ago, though it's down from last week's nearly $4.09. That has Wall Street's attention focused on Wednesday, when the U.S. government will release the latest monthly reading on inflation. Economists expect it to show inflation remains high, but that it decelerated to 3.4% in July from 3.5% in June. That could help the Federal Reserve, whose members are notably split on whether they should be raising the country's interest rates to keep a lid on inflation. While higher rates could help slow the increases of prices on store shelves, they would also slow the overall U.S. economy by making it more expensive for U.S. households and businesses to borrow money. They would also undercut prices for stocks and other investments. Traders are betting on a coin flip's chance that the Fed will raise its main interest rate at its next meeting in September, according to data from CME Group. If it does, that would be the first increase in more than 3 years. It also could anger President Donald Trump, who has been lobbying for lower interest rates. Treasury yields have jumped since the war with Iran because of higher oil prices and worries about inflation, sending long-term mortgage rates to their highest levels in a year. The 10-year-old Treasury yield eased back Tuesday, falling to 4.68% from 4.72% late Monday, but it remains well above its 3.97% level from before the war with Iran. On Wall Street, Cardinal Health rose 1.5%, after becoming the latest big U.S. company to report a stronger profit for the spring than analysts expected. Businesses have blown past analysts' forecasts, which Wall Street loves because stock prices tend to follow the path of corporate profits over the long term. Aramark, the food company and facilities manager, rallied 9.7% after reporting stronger profit and revenue for the latest quarter than analysts expected. They helped offset a drop of 19.1% for On Holding. The Swiss sneaker company also topped analysts' forecasts for profit in the latest quarter, but it gave a forecast for upcoming revenue that fell short of analysts' expectations, while saying it does not want to slash prices to drum up more sales. Intel slipped 0.2% after it said it would sell $20 billion of its stock at $95 per share. That's up from the $15 billion that it said it would sell the day before, and such moves dilute the ownership stakes of people who already own Intel stock. Intel plans to use the cash it's raising for investments to take advantage of the boom in demand for artificial intelligence technology. In stock markets abroad, indexes edged higher in Europe, following a mixed finish in Asia. Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 1.1% for one of the world's bigger moves. Trump hid in a catering truck before flying out of Turkey because of Iran threat, report says. President Donald Trump secretly flew out of last month's NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, on an alternate military aircraft, while the White House made it appear that the Republican president was flying on Air Force One, according to a report published by the Washington Post on Monday. The Post said the operation was prompted by an Iranian assassination threat against Trump. The ruse was carried out as journalists and some White House staff members were led to believe they were on the same plane as the president as he began his journey back to Washington from the annual gathering of NATO country leaders. The Post cited material reviewed by the newspaper, a U.S. official familiar with the operation, and another person with knowledge of the president's travel. The Associated Press has not independently confirmed the report. Trump had flown to the summit in a new Qatari-gifted and retrofitted red, white, and navy blue jet, but ahead of departing Turkey, he said he would fly partway home on an older model baby blue Air Force One plane instead. The president at the time said the new luxury jet was being flown out ahead of his departure from Ankara to give some U.S. troops based in eastern England a chance to check out the new Air Force One. In Ankara, Trump boarded the old Air Force One jumbo jet in view of television cameras ahead of the plane flying to Royal Air Force Mildenhall in the United Kingdom. However, according to the Post report, after boarding the Legacy Air Force One jet, he was secretly shuttled minutes later to a smaller plane, an Air Force C-32A, via an airport catering truck typically used to load meals and other supplies. Trump flew to Mildenhall on that smaller jet. The White House did not respond directly to questions about the Post report of the secret operation to whisk Trump out of the country on a third aircraft, or the reported elaborate ruse to make it appear he was on the baby blue Air Force One jet flying to Mildenhall. As the president has said recently, there are many enemies of America who have their sights on him, and we use every tool at our disposal to address those threats, White House Communications Director Stephen Chung said in a statement. The U.S. Secret Service declined to comment. The Air Force, which maintains the fleet of executive travel aircraft, referred questions to the White House. There have been questions about the safety of the new Qatari-gifted plane. While Trump was in Turkey, the U.S. military conducted a series of large strikes in Iran in retaliation for its attacks on merchant shipping in the region. The New York Times and CBS News reported last month that intelligence officials had raised concerns about a potential attack on the president or his jet, triggering additional precautions, and the decision not to use the newly inaugurated aircraft gifted to Trump by Qatar for the first leg of Trump's trip home from Ankara. The swap had spurred questions about the security of the Qatar-provided aircraft, and Trump said last month after the trip that it would undergo additional upgrades. Chung on Monday maintained that the new Qatari-gifted plane was a state-of-the-art aircraft that has been fitted with high-level security protocols that ensure the safety of the president and his staff. The New Post report on clandestinely putting Trump on a third aircraft and quietly whisking him out of the country adds a fresh layer to just how seriously concerned U.S. security officials were about the threat against Trump during the ongoing war with Iran. Paul Eklof, a former special agent with the Secret Service, said such an unusual move could either reflect actionable intelligence or an abundance of caution given volatility in the region with the wars in Iran and Ukraine. I would not say unprecedented, but it is an unusual occurrence, Eklof told the Associated Press. The Post reported that to exit that plane without being seen by those uninvolved in the operation, Trump and several aides stepped aboard an airport catering truck, which was elevated plane side, using hydraulics and positioned at a door on the opposite side of Air Force One's entrance. The small group of reporters who thought they were traveling with Trump were advised to lower their window shades ahead of takeoff. After arriving at Mildenhall, news photographers captured images of Trump getting off the presidential plane, suggesting he reboarded Air Force One out of sight of the pack of journalists who thought they were traveling with him. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal called for a congressional investigation. It is unprecedented and it is surreal, he said Monday on CNN, calling the incident downright scary. After the brief visit to the base at Mildenhall, Trump boarded the new Air Force One aircraft to fly the rest of the way to Washington. During a gaggle with reporters aboard the aircraft, Trump was asked directly if there was any credible threats on Air Force One by Iran. Well, I have a threat all the time. I'm number one on their list before you, Trump said. He added to the traveling reporters, but if I go, you go. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Canada puts the military on standby as British Columbia wildfires kill one and displace thousands. Canada put its military on standby Monday to help battle deadly wildfires in British Columbia as a local mayor warned that one of the blazes had wreaked destruction on his community. A woman has died and some 20,000 people have fled their homes. For days, scores of wildfires have burned across the province, nearly half of them out of control in hot, windy weather and prolonged drought. Thousands have fled on jammed roads, as officials said even more communities could be threatened. The mayor of Summerland, home to about 12,000 people, which was ordered evacuated on Saturday night, along with about 8,000 people in and around nearby Peachland, warned that the affected areas remained too dangerous to enter and that it was impossible to determine the scope of the destruction. The blaze, known as the Bald Range wildfire, remained out of control after racing towards Summerland and other communities along Okanagan Lake over the weekend. We need to brace ourselves for that bad news when it's time to go back. Everybody will know somebody who has lost a home, Summerland Mayor Doug Holmes said. Canada's defense minister says the military is ready to respond. Defense Minister David McGuinty said the Canadian Armed Forces were in constant contact with provincial and federal officials and were ready to respond if British Columbia formally requested assistance. The federal government has already approved provincial requests for help with shelter and accommodations. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police said an 80-year-old woman died while trying to escape the fire near Summerland. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said the death was heartbreaking and that the federal government would continue supporting British Columbia. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police said the cause of the wildfire is under investigation. The British Columbia Wildfire Service said the fire had grown to about 60 square miles. Officials warned clear skies and direct sunlight could increase fire activity. Hugh Murdoch, an incident commander on the fire, said about 99 wildland firefighters and 120 structure protections personnel were working the blaze along with heavy equipment and helicopters. He said 100 firefighters from Mexico were expected to join crews Tuesday morning. Ravi Parmar, British Columbia Forestry Minister, said 19 helicopters were assigned to the Bald Range wildfire, but that its intensity made it impossible to halt the blaze. We could have put 1,000 more helicopters and 1,000 more people on the ground, and it wouldn't have made a difference, he said. British Columbia Wildfire Service spokesperson Nicole Bonnet said the smoke lingering over the fire has reduced visibility, limiting the use of air tankers and water-skimming aircraft. Bonnet said the blaze has been fueled primarily by extremely dry conditions rather than wind, and grew explosively Friday, reaching 19 square miles within 3 hours. Evacuated residents face uncertain prospects for return. Graham Statt, Chief Administrative Officer of Summerland, said residents will be allowed to return to their neighborhoods in phases, but he did not say when. Holmes, the mayor, was more blunt, saying residents would not be going home anytime soon and that the process could not begin until the fire was brought under control. Kyla Gaudioso, a resident of the tiny community of Falder, said her home was likely destroyed as she had received a photo showing the ridge where it stood engulfed in flames. She described the community's evacuation as pandemonium and said she was now staying with a friend in the town of Penticton. It doesn't really seem real, she said. I have to see it to believe it. Canada has endured increasingly destructive wildfire seasons in recent years, forcing mass evacuations and repeatedly sending smoke across large parts of the country and neighboring United States. Summerland, a farming community that grows cherries, peaches, and apples, and also boasts some vineyards, is in a mountainous area where past wildfires have occurred. Holmes said the blaze started around 5:30 p.m. Friday and was within the city limits in just a couple of hours. By midnight, it was so out of control that people were unable to flee on the highway north, so they began evacuating to the south, he said. People said they've never seen a fire move so fast, he said. Firefighters still battling blazes across the U.S. West. In California, evacuations have been ordered for areas along the famous Big Sur coast as a wildfire burns in the nearby steep, rugged mountains. The timber fire in Monterey County started Sunday and had grown to about 2 square miles by midday Monday, according to Cal Fire. By Monday, a quick-moving blaze just north of Reno, Nevada, had forced about 5,500 people to evacuate, according to the U.S. Wildland Fire Service. Fueled by hot, dry, and windy conditions, the bug fire grew to nearly 27 square miles after igniting Saturday in California. Firefighters in Spokane, Washington, have strengthened containment lines around 3 destructive blazes in recent days, allowing some evacuated residents to return home. Washington Governor Bob Ferguson said he visited some of the burned neighborhoods and met a couple who lost everything. They told him that losing their home was terrible, but losing the community was worse, he said. It's our job to rebuild that community, Ferguson said. Oregon, meanwhile, is experiencing its worst year on record for land burned by large wildfires, with 3,671 square miles scorched, said Northwest Interagency Coordination Center spokesperson Gene Nelson Dean. That beats the state's previous record set in 2024. Former Syrian President Assad sentenced to death in absentia for war crimes. A Syrian court on Tuesday sentenced ousted President Bashar Assad and his brother in absentia for murder, torture, and crimes against humanity committed before and during the country's 14-year civil war that left about 500,000 people dead. The verdicts by a court in Damascus are the first against Assad or any members of his inner circle since his family's 5 decades in power came to an end 20 months ago. They are mostly symbolic, however, because Assad and his brother Maher had fled to Russia, where they received asylum after the Syrian government's stunning collapse in December of 2024. 6 other former officials were also sentenced to death in absentia. The only former official sentenced to death and in custody is Assad's maternal cousin, Atef Najib, who oversaw a crackdown on dissent that led to an uprising that sparked the civil war. Najib stood inside a cage, wearing a prisoner's uniform, as the judge read his sentence aloud, and a crowd gathered outside the heavily guarded courthouse. Even though Assad is unlikely to ever face justice, the verdicts will be popular among many Syrians, especially those who have expressed frustration that the new government hasn't moved with enough speed or strength against Assad-era figures. Some human rights groups, though, expressed concerns that the trials were rushed, potentially unfair, and at the very least, exposed flaws in Syria's justice system. Bashar Assad used state agencies to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity, said Judge Fakhreddin El-Aryan during a court session that was aired live on state TV, a contrast with Assad-era trials which were conducted in secret. The verdicts El-Aryan read aloud found Assad and the others guilty of premeditated murder, including against children, as well as other acts of brutality, including torture. El-Aryan said Najib could appeal. Today is the day of justice for all the wounded, martyrs, detainees, and Syrians who were forced to leave their country, said attorney Adnan al-Mosleh, who represented families of Najib's victims. Today marks a victory of right against injustice, a victory of the Syrian people against the ousted regime. Najib is one of the highest-ranking security officials to be put on trial. He is a former Army Brigadier General who is in charge of political security in Syria's southern Daraa province. During his tenure, more than a dozen teenagers who scrawled anti-government graffiti on a school wall were arrested and tortured. The case became a catalyst for mass protests against the repressive policies of Assad's security forces. The protests were met by a brutal government crackdown in 2011 that spiraled into the civil war that ended with Assad's ouster in a lightning rebel offensive. Some of Najib's victims were present at the courthouse, including 2 who were teenagers in 2011, and expressed their opinions to the Associated Press. Today we reached a point where the blood was not wasted, said Mouia Siyasne about those who died in the crackdown. 15 years later, there is happiness that Atef Najib was sentenced to death, he said. Another man, Nayef Abazid, who was detained at the age of 13 in 2011, expressed his satisfaction with the sentence, adding that our biggest happiness will be when Bashar Assad is executed. Maher Assad was a former commander of the Syrian military's 4th Armored Division, which opposition activists have accused of killings, torture, extortion, and drug trafficking, in addition to running its own detention centers. Today's scenes outside the courthouse reflect 15 years of pain and a justice long denied, said Hiba Zayedin, Syria researcher at Human Rights Watch. She said the rights group opposes the death penalty in all cases, including this one, because it's cruel and irreversible, especially when a fair trial isn't guaranteed. She said the appeal process for Najib needs to meet fair trial standards. Real accountability for Assad-area crimes depends on Syria building a justice system that lasts, she said. The Washington-based Syria Justice and Accountability Center described Tuesday's conviction of Najib as a historical step in Syria's transitional period, but said it exposed major flaws in the justice system which likely jeopardized his right to a fair trial. It said that SJAC's trial monitoring team attended Najib's trial and documented multiple issues such as rushed proceedings and witness testimony that did not connect Atef to the crimes he was charged with. SJAC said Najib's lawyer lacked the capacity and willingness to meaningfully engage with the case or mount an adequate defense. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Former U.S. Marine held in Russia for more than 4 years on disputed charges has been released. Russia has released an American military veteran who spent more than 4 years in prison on disputed charges under abusive conditions and was said to be gravely ill and at risk of dying, a group advocating for him said Tuesday. Robert Gilman was on his way to a U.S. military hospital in Texas where he will be medically and psychologically assessed and treated, said Eric Lebson, Chief Strategy Officer of Global Reach, a group that's been working to free him and other American detainees abroad. Gilman's family has flown to Texas to be with him, including his mother, who was in Russia attempting to see him at a hospital. Gilman, a 32-year-old teacher detained since 2022, was initially handed a 3.5-year sentence when he was convicted of beating a police officer after being taken off a train for causing a disturbance. He later was convicted of attacking a prison inspector during a cell check, beating an investigator, and assaulting a guard, and he was sentenced in October 2024 to 8 years and 1 month. His sentence was extended last year to 10 years after he was found guilty of assaulting prison guards. Gilman's sister, Lexi Hudson, credited President Donald Trump and U.S. Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts with bringing about the former Marine's release. There is no other reason that Robert is alive today other than that President Trump heard about the case and took action, said Hudson, who thanked Markey for leading our advocacy efforts in Congress. The Russians treated my brother so badly, Hudson said. They hurt him for no reason other than that he was both an American and a Marine. What did they get out of this? Why did they do this to such a wonderful person? The State Department said that Gilman, who had been determined recently to have been wrongfully detained, was released on humanitarian grounds and was not part of an exchange, and no other concessions were provided. This is a welcome step that we hope leads to the release of Americans unjustly held in Russia, such as wrongful detainee Stephen Hubbard, it said. Before Gilman was flown out of Russia, he had been in a dissociative stupor for 47 days due to the abuse he has suffered in prison, Lebson said. Gilman had been moved from a prison to a civilian hospital where he was hooked up to a feeding tube and handcuffed to a bed. Hospital reports conveyed Gilman's condition as dire and life-threatening, pushing the U.S. government into action and leading to a unilateral humanitarian release by Russian officials, Lepsin said. Markey had called on Russia and the U.S. to work together to get the Massachusetts resident released. Gilman was among at least 8 Americans who remained in Russian custody after a series of high-profile prisoner exchanges with the U.S. in recent years. Markey blamed Russia for Gilman's poor health, saying his return to the U.S. was long overdue. It is a tragedy that it took Robert's near-death condition for his case to receive the attention that it required for his release to be negotiated, Markey said. Throughout his detention, Robert was subjected to physical torture, forced medication, and provocations by Russian authorities. There is no doubt that his treatment by Russian authorities is the reason Robert is in this precarious state today. The Associated Press was making efforts to get comment from Russian officials on Gilman's release. Taiwan court sentences a woman to 7 years in prison for conspiring with Chinese officials. A Taiwanese court on Tuesday sentenced a woman who advocated for spouses born in mainland China to 7 years in prison after finding her guilty of conspiring with Chinese government officials and proxies to influence Taiwanese politics. The court in New Taipei City ruled that Su Chunying, who was herself born in China, violated the Anti-Infiltration Act for contact with Chinese officials and the Banking Act by transferring 24.5 million new Taiwan dollars, or 760,000 US dollars, outside of proper banking channels from China. The case has garnered intense media attention, partly because of Su's identity as a so-called mainland spouse, those born in China who immigrated to Taiwan after marriage. The community has been viewed with suspicion amid rising tensions between China and Taiwan. Taiwan and China split after a civil war in 1949. China claims the self-governing island as part of its territory and has sent fighter jets and Navy ships to the island on a daily basis as part of military exercises. Taiwan, in response, has focused on strengthening its defense and ramping up its arms purchases. Taiwan's government said Su's case involved gaining intelligence from mainland China and influencing Taiwanese politics. Prosecutors have publicized exchanges between Su and a director from the Ministry of Civil Affairs of China, which showed discussions about which political party to support in order to get lawmaker positions for mainland spouses in both the Taipei mayoral election and later the 2024 presidential election. Su moved to Taiwan after getting married and has Taiwanese citizenship. She was briefly considered to be a Taiwan People's Party legislator candidate, but had backed out owing to questions about her loyalty and affiliation with China. I had just wanted to serve new residents, she said in 2024, referring to the Taiwanese government's term for immigrants to the island. Su most recently served as the head of the Cross Straits Marriage and Family Services Alliance. The organization was disbanded by Taiwan's Interior Ministry in May for not holding elections for their directors in time. Su cannot be reached for comment. According to prosecutors, Su met often with Yang Wentao, director of the Service Center for Cross-Strait Marriages and Families at the Chinese Ministry of Civil Affairs, and Sun Cheng, deputy head of the Revolutionary Committee of the Chinese Kuomintang in Shanghai. Prosecutors said that Su and Yang coordinated to support Wang Shenshan, an independent candidate for Taipei mayor, who later joined the TPP. Later, Su also campaigned for Ko Wen-je, a presidential candidate and TPP founder, at their instructions, prosecutors said. Critics said the judgment was problematic because the wording of the charges was vague. The DPP government is deliberately avoiding drawing clear red lines to ensure that it can arbitrarily weaponize this charge, said Shang Xinlun, a writer and activist who has advocated on behalf of mainland spouses in Taiwan. In 2025, Taiwan deported 3 Chinese spouses for advocating for reunification with China using military force. Taiwanese immigration authorities issued an order to 12,000 mainland spouses who already had Taiwanese citizenship to submit records showing that they had canceled their Chinese household registrations. Worries over espionage and tech smuggling to China have grown as authorities continue to prosecute cases. Taiwanese authorities in March investigated 3 men for trying to smuggle super microcomputer servers containing advanced NVIDIA chips to China. Last year, a Taiwanese court sentenced 4 soldiers, including 3 members of Taiwan President Lai Ching-te's security team, to 7 years in prison for giving sensitive information to China. Magnitude 7.4 quake rocks Western Colombia, killing at least 111 people. A powerful 7.4 magnitude earthquake struck Western Colombia on Monday, killing at least 111 people, damaging hundreds of buildings and leaving many trapped under debris while their loved ones and rescue workers searched through rubble. Search teams and civilians picked through the remains of destroyed buildings in the country's 3rd largest city, Cali, passing large pieces of concrete and other rubble down a long line of volunteers. Our building has basically been left in ruins, and the building next to ours completely collapsed, said Alvaro Lopez, who cradled his dog as he watched the search. The desperate scene recalled the searches still ongoing in neighboring Venezuela, weeks after that country was devastated by 2 powerful earthquakes. Besides Cali, the quake ravaged cities across western Colombia, including Barrera, Quibdó, and Manizales, and was felt in neighboring Ecuador and Panama. The epicenter was in San Jose del Palmar, a community of about 4,800 people in the Choco region, about 250 miles west of Bogota, the U.S. Geological Survey said. Colombia's president, Abelardo de la Espriella, said at least 87 people were injured and around 1,600 buildings were damaged, including at least 61 that completely collapsed. He declared an emergency to expedite funding for the quake recovery. We aren't going to leave our people alone. They are in our hearts, and we are going to tend to people with our full determination, he said. Most powerful quake recorded in Colombia this century. Colombia's Geological Service said Monday's quake was the country's strongest recorded in the 21st century, and that it was followed by several aftershocks. Colombia's Pacific region around the epicenter lies along the Ring of Fire, the line of seismic faults encircling the Pacific Ocean where most of the world's earthquakes occur. The Pacific, particularly the Choco region, is one of Colombia's poorest, nestled in dense jungle. Much of the Choco is only reachable by boat or plane, which may pose difficulty in assessing the wider toll. Local authorities said the death toll included at least 40 people who were killed in the Risaralda region, where Pereira is located, and 27 people in the Valle del Cauca region, where Cali is located, including 3 children. Authorities also confirmed 9 people killed in Choco, 2 in the Caldas region, and a 73-year-old in the Antioquia region. It was not immediately clear where the other 32 people died. The earthquakes left many in the Andean nation unnerved after 2 back-to-back quakes devastated neighboring Venezuela in late June, destroying hundreds of buildings and killing more than 6,300 people. By Monday afternoon, people had begun reporting their loved ones missing on digital databases, just as civilians did following Venezuela's earthquakes. One database had more than 2,000 people, mostly in Cali and Pereira, with the number steadily climbing. Photos of the missing, including a young mother and her baby in Pereira. Another showed an 80-year-old woman in Cali whose family was desperately looking for details after her building collapsed. Cities left devastated. Jorge Moncayo, a 64-year-old taxi driver in Cali, said he saw plumes of dust shoot up across the city as buildings collapsed. Residents and rescue workers were searching the rubble for survivors. The local government said that people remained trapped in a number of the city's 380 damaged buildings. My entire house shook. I've never lived through such a powerful earthquake, he said. We're thanking God we're alive. Little was known about the extent of the damage in Choco, a remote region where officials reported dozens of injured people and damaged buildings, but few other details. Phone signals were out in many parts of the region's capital, Quibdó. The town closest to the earthquake's epicenter, San Jose del Palmar, has no airport and is located on top of a mountain ridge along a highway linking the cities of Cali and Pereira. In Pereira, further south in the coffee-producing mountains of Colombia, photos and videos on local media showed pieces of the airport ceiling falling onto travelers, taking shelter and screaming. People ran through rubble and plumes of dust, and residents said collapsed stores, residential buildings, and homes lined the city. Pereira Mayor Mauricio Salazar told a local radio station there were at least 15 collapsed buildings where people were feared trapped. In nearby Manizales, one of the towers of the neo-Gothic cathedral collapsed and fell on the nave. Mayor Jorge Eduardo Rojas asked residents to stay outside in case of aftershocks. Authorities said flights were suspended at the airports in Manizales, Quibdó, Armenia, Cartago, Buenaventura, and Pereira as they assessed damage. Offers of aid pour in from across the Americas. Small earthquakes, known as temblores, are common in central and western Colombia, but those above 6.0 magnitude are rare. In 1999, a 6.2 magnitude quake near the city of Armenia killed more than 1,100 people. Response to the earthquake presents the first major challenge for De La Espriella, a Trump ally who was sworn in as president over the weekend. A divisive figure because of his pledge of an all-out crackdown on criminal groups, De La Espriella said he had personally taken charge of the government's response to the emergency. On Monday night, the U.S. State Department announced it would provide $15.5 million for emergency shelter, food, and other earthquake response aid. Governments across Latin America also lined up to help. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, whose countries were among the largest providers of aid to Venezuela following its recent crisis, said they were ready to assist Colombia. From El Salvador, we are in communication and ready to provide immediate support with our rescue teams, medical personnel, paramedics, supplies, or any other assistance that our Colombian brothers and sisters deem necessary, Bukele said. Chilean President Jose Antonio Cast said Chile, one of the region's most earthquake-prone countries, knows the pain and the challenge left by earthquakes and pledged help. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Trump scoffs at Iran's demand for war reparations and other Mideast developments. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday scoffed at Iran's demand for reparations for devastation caused to the country by the U.S. and Israeli bombardment over the past 5 months, a demand he said Tehran's negotiators hadn't raised until now. Here's a look at the latest developments in the Iran war and the wider Middle East, Full coverage can be found here. Trump demands Iran pay for decades of U.S. military deaths. Trump's social media post Monday came after Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghei stressed that Iran will not reopen the Strait of Hormuz until the U.S. meets its conditions. Tehran wants the U.S. to end its blockade of Iranian ports, lift economic sanctions, and release Iran's frozen assets. It also said the U.S. must pay compensation for war damage. It is up to the U.S. side to stop and make amends for its illegal and destructive actions, Baghei said. Trump responded that he is now demanding compensation from Iran for all the people that they have killed and gravely wounded with their roadside bombs and many conflicts. The U.S. government has blamed Iran-backed militants for the deaths and injuries of hundreds of Americans over several decades. They include 1983 bombing that killed 241 U.S. military personnel at a Marine compound in Beirut, and the deaths of at least 603 U.S. troops in Iraq between 2003 and 2011. Trump said he also wants Tehran to compensate the families of Iranian protesters who were killed. I have instructed my representatives to put this firmly into any and all future negotiations, Trump said in his post. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly one-fifth of the world's traded oil supplies passed before the war, has kept energy prices as a major focus of U.S. politics ahead of November's midterm elections. Iran's supreme leader is said to want unity amid signs of division. Iran's president said the country's supreme leader is calling for unity and cohesion as the Islamic Republic faces economic hardships and sanctions stemming from its war with the United States. President Masoud Pezeshkian described a nearly 7-hour meeting with Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei in an interview with Iranian state television that aired amid apparent tensions among the Islamic Republic's leaders. Pezeshkian told the state-run IRIB that he and Khamenei discussed people's livelihoods, the state of the market, employment, people's housing, as well as problems that are now being created as a result of the U.S. sanctions. He didn't say when or where they met. Most important, he said, was Khamenei's emphasis on unity. All of the enemy's plans are aimed at creating division, Pezeshkian said. What we have to do is prevent divisions from emerging. It is only the second time the Iranian president has said he has met with the new supreme leader since Khamenei was appointed in March, following a U.S.-Israeli strike that killed his father. Khamenei, believed to have been wounded in the same attack, has not appeared in public since then. Iran names former Revolutionary Guard leader to top security post. Iran on Sunday appointed Mohsen Rezai, a military advisor, to its new supreme leader to head its powerful Supreme National Security Council. Rezai commanded Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard from 1981 to 1997, a period that includes Iran's 1980s war with Iraq. The 71-year-old hardliner last week threatened American forces with serious risks and casualties if the U.S. did not lift its blockade of Iranian ports. Rezai replaces Mohammad Bagher Zogdar, who will become a political advisor to Khamenei. While Rezai appears willing to negotiate with the U.S. to secure Iran's maximalist aims, including control of the Strait of Hormuz, he has also been unwilling to present any Iranian concessions, wrote the Institute for the Study of War, a U.S.-based think tank. Israel declares closed military zone in Taiba. Israel's military said Monday it had declared a Christian-majority town in the occupied West Bank a closed military zone to keep out Israeli settlers and other non-residents. The new tactic is designed to keep Israelis out of Taiba, which has been subject to arson, vandalism, and settlers coming onto private and village property. The army said Palestinian residents and journalists would be allowed unless soldiers determined their presence poses a threat. The army said its troops would detain suspects and disperse gatherings to keep the peace. The designation comes after months of the army and police struggling to maintain order throughout the territory, where at least 87 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli settlers or soldiers in 2026, according to the Ramallah-based Palestinian Health Ministry. Yemen says the Houthi attack on a Red Sea town Sunday killed 7. Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels attacked a Red Sea port town controlled by government forces on Sunday, killing 7 and injuring 30 people. Yemen's defense ministry, which operates under its internationally recognized government, said 4 military personnel and 3 civilians were killed. Clashes continued Monday near the village of Taiz. The Houthi group said a 13-year-old child was killed by artillery shelling and another child was injured. The attack on Mocha is the latest in one of the largest waves of Houthi strikes on Yemeni military positions and areas held by the Saudi-backed government since a 2022 truce. It comes as threats to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz have renewed focus on the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Strait at its southern tip. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the August 11th issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Brian. Thank you for listening.